Thank you all for joining us tonight. This is the Alumni Achievement Awards are really my favorite event of every single year. It recognizes the wonderful work that many of our alums have done. Unfortunately, it's very limited, right? We give about the College Alumni Association Board gives about 7 to 10 awards every year, depending on whether they award in multiple categories or not. And it's a very hard decision. I sit through every decision-making conversation that they have, that where they look at the entire rolling list of well over 100 nominees now. I think we're close to 200 right now. They look at everyone and they try to focus on the milestone reunion years. So this year that would be classes ending in the 2s and the 7s. It's a hard decision for them, I know, but it's also one of their favorite programs every year. So I know that they really enjoy going through the whole process. So I'm going to roll right into our first awardee, and I didn't prepare her. Ellie, it's you.
Okay.
So the first award that we're presenting tonight is Achievement in the Arts Award, which recognizes alumni who demonstrate exceptional and sustained success in the field of art, music, and/or theater, exhibit outstanding character and loyalty to Drew, and personify the basic ideals of the university. This is one of our newest awards. Our newest is a Friend of Drew Award. The Achievement of the Arts Award was just established about three or 4 years ago. So it is one of our newest awards here. And it's going to Eleanor Selfridge Field, class of 62 this year. So Eleanor looks back on Drew as having set the foundation for her achievements by nurturing her ability to keep on growing no matter the obstacles. Ellie's achievements include a master's in journalism from Columbia and a doctoral degree in music from Oxford University. Her professional life developed in 2 strands. As a published author focused on the music, literature, and arts in early modern Venice, and as an originator in the field of computational musicology, which she teaches at Stanford. Ellie is married to Clive, a physicist, and has 1 son and 2 granddaughters. With others in the Stanford community, she has participated in health-related initiatives, including the founding of a consumer-governed health service with hospice care. And so, Ellie, I'm going to let you take it away from here.
Okay, fine. Well, thank you very much. I was astounded when I first heard about this award because I'm well aware that Drew has many good choices. I can understand why there are 200 people on the list. There's lots of talent and a lot of it's very unusual and so on and so forth. I have lived for almost 50 years on the West Coast. So I don't have as much day-to-day or face-to-face contact with Drew and most alumni as many other people who live a lot closer to New York and New Jersey. But I am very grateful and I'm very humbled as well. I decided that in trying to gather together just a few remarks to describe what I value after 60 years of what went on at Drew when I was there, that I would just concentrate on a couple of things because I want to keep my remarks very brief. Drew was then, and is still in a relative sense, a very small liberal arts college. And it's very hard to sustain these institutions today. I'm well aware of that. I happen to work for a large institution that doesn't have to order its priorities in quite the same way that small liberal arts colleges do. But I valued that smallness, and yet at the same time, I was the only music major in my class. And when I figured that out, I was a little bit sad that it didn't have very good implications for social opportunities, let's say. And I learned pretty early on that I was going to have to master the language and learn something about the interests of my classmates. And it was such a small school. We all knew each other across the grades too. So some of my friends were in adjacent classes or 2 years removed from our class. And I thought that was all great, actually. And it's taken a long time to understand or be able to articulate exactly why that that was actually a privilege to be put in that position, because there were constant conversations across different interests and different disciplines. And as I teach in a large school, what I see is that we're all in silos and we don't have nearly as many opportunities to interact with people who are in disciplines that may have a great deal to do with ours or have very interesting intersections. But there's no way to be able to take advantage of that. So when I look back to Drew, I think about conversations and experiences with things like fetal pigs in one corner of the room, and John Milton in another corner, and French cathedrals in a third space. And the particulars obviously change as tastes change in the world, but I still value that diversity. Another thing that stands out to me about Drew is that it was a community of very committed people, not necessarily committed to the same thing, but they were committed to being dedicated to one thing, or sometimes more than one thing. And that's something else that in more modern universities, if I can call them that, that I see that there may be people with equal degrees of commitment, but they're harder to identify. They're harder to bring together than they were at Drew. And I realize Drew has grown a lot since our classes were there, but I still think that commitment is one of the things I associate with Drew. I think what I take away from those experiences, which you can construe in a lot of different ways, is that I was forced over and over again to be comfortable with value conflicts that arise between fields. They, of course, arise between people, but they arise between fields as well. And that appreciation has been very valuable to me in a lot of the work I have done in the last 40 years, which has involved computers and has involved music and has involved other things from time to time as well. It's a little hard to drive that home in a very simple statement, but to go back to the French cathedrals for a minute, about 5 years ago, I went to a conference in the middle of France. It was in the city of Tours, which was very badly hampered and destroyed. Parts of it were completely destroyed during the Second World War. But it's well known for its cathedral. And I took an afternoon off from the conference to go see the cathedral. And I was completely mesmerized because it is, together with Notre Dame de Paris and the Milan Cathedral, I would say they're the three. Westminster Abbey is very, very lovely too, but Tours has something special. It has remarkable stained glass and it has flying buttresses. We used to read in books about flying buttresses, but nobody could quite get the hang of what they were. And the gargoyles, which are just so expressive. They're functional also. They help water in lieu of rain spouts. They use these gargoyles for the rain to pour out. And I spent 2 hours there. I was fascinated. And I went back to my conference and somebody came up to me in a short while later and said, "Why did you waste a whole afternoon going to an old church?" And that's the attitude that I run across, not too often, but it's always there. It's always under the surface. And so I said, it's one of the most remarkable human achievements that there is in all of Europe. And I couldn't imagine not going there. And I got a harumph for that. But, I do savor the fact that Drew, I think, gave all of us in different ways a secure foundation to go out into an insecure world. And so I think that is really the thing that is of greatest value to me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellie. That's wonderful. And just so you all know, I'm going to open this up for questioning, questions for our awardees a little bit later. That's something we don't have the luxury to do when we are in person, but we do have that tonight. So we're going to go from one of our most recent awards to one of our most recent awards. We just awarded this for the very first time, the Achievement in the Arts for the very first time in 2017. And I'm going to go back and now award the Achievement in the Liberal Arts Award, which was established in 1956. So from one of our newest to our oldest. The Achievement in the Liberal Arts Award recognizes alumni who, through exceptional and sustained success in their chosen careers, outstanding character and loyalty to Drew, have demonstrated the efficacy of a liberal arts education. So this award is being presented to Marti Denny from the class of 1967. About 10 years after she graduated, Marti found herself sitting in a Moscow prison. A Foreign Service officer, she had been arrested by the KGB and accused of spying for the CIA. She was questioned, released, and expelled from Russia by way of the first plane back to the US. Marti ultimately published a memoir, The Wordless Spy, after retiring from a 32-year career in which she was, in fact, a CIA case officer from whom Foreign Service work in Moscow had been a cover. It was her time at Drew that ultimately led her to the CIA. After Drew, Marti earned a master's degree at UNC Chapel Hill while maintaining contact with a fellow Drew student, John Peterson, who was serving with the Army in Vietnam. The couple married in 1969. John joined the CIA. By 1972, Marti found herself a CIA widow and decided to join the agency herself. She continued to serve after being sent home from Russia and eventually remarried, had 2 children, has been honored with intelligence awards, including the William J. Donovan Award and the George H.W. Bush Award for Excellence in Counterterrorism. So congratulations, Marti, and I'm going to let you take it from here.
Thank you so much. That sounded like a busy life. I was so pleased, Ellie, that you described Drew in many ways the same way as I did, and I only graduated 5 years after you. It was a wonderful time in history for us to be in that setting where thought and independence was appreciated and encouraged. I was a sociology major, which my husband often pointed out was a study of the obvious. But the understanding of how groups of people operate has been of amazing value throughout my life and my career. Not only with having children and seeing a small group of 2 and with parents 4, but also in work settings at CIA, where I understood the value of the dynamics of small groups. And of course, that's what I studied and did my senior paper on. The other thing Drew did was to allow us a way to be independent. I think I said that, but I remember in my freshman year, and it was very early, it may have been late September of 1963, there was a young man on campus, a member of our class, John Peterson, who went off campus and imbibed too much. Of course, now they have a bar in the student union. So, I mean, this is such history. But he went out, got drunk, and came back onto campus. And when they went to find him, because they knew he was in the dorm, he jumped out the second story window and broke his thumb. Well, then the security people came and took him to the hospital, and they said he made some rude comments to a nurse, but of course, all he did, it was a pregnant nurse, and as he recalled, he asked if she was married. So those were the rude comments. It seems so relative, doesn't it, to how absurd that sounds in today's understanding of things. But the dean at the time, Dean Solwin, I think, expelled him from school summarily, just threw him out. And it was a tragedy for John because he was there under full scholarship. He was from a family, his parents had emigrated as well as he did from Latvia right at the end of the war. And they didn't have the financial ability to support him at school. So he was really on all scholarships. So he had to leave campus. Well, his fellow students in our class, we were outraged that he would have to leave like that without any due process. So we decided we would picket Baldwin Hall. And we all got out there with signs and walked in a circle around the quad there in front of Baldwin Hall. No, it wasn't. It was Brothers Hall. And the newspaper came from Morristown and took our pictures, and it was a big deal. But we made it change. We brought change to the university, and the dean and the rest of the administration decided that probably they should have a means of adjudicating these things in a fair way. And by senior year, I'm not quite sure how I managed to do this, but I was on the judiciary board, and we sat, and we were all students, of course, and because it was a peer court, and we adjudicated cases, hopefully with some wisdom and an accumulation of experience through our 4 years. And what that gave me was that it's worth it to stand up and take responsibility for something that you think isn't right, and to take responsibility and forge change. And I think that lived with me throughout my career. And isn't that the value of a liberal arts education? Like you said, Ellie, we accepted everyone as part of who we were, and we learned so much from one another. So when John and I got married and went to Laos, we were in the same type of situation, thrown in a very remote and limited society there. The Lao people were kind of victims of the war in Vietnam, and my husband worked so hard to make it better for them. But we were in a village with one paved road, with markets. We didn't have any communication with home, no TV, no radio, no internet, of course, no cell phones, no mail every now and then. And I went from life in a university setting where everything was kind of provided to a place where I really had to use my own initiative to get food and live comfortably. So when he died in October of 1972, I was, of course, devastated. Like I said, we were 27, we were starting our life. It's when you dream and when you think of all the things in the future, the children you're going to have, the places you're going to travel. And so that that ended with his death. And I went back to Washington to sign insurance papers. And a friend suggested that I applied to the CIA. And so I did. And I went into a man's world. Of course, I had been in a man's world in Laos as well, but in CIA, women at that time, of course, weren't accepted partners. We were accepted as helpers, as all kinds of aides and, kind of associates trying to help do operations overseas. But I was trained as the men were. I went with them to training. And when I finished training, I felt like I had received kind of a unique ability for women of that time. I wasn't the only woman doing this. There were a lot of women, but most of them, like I said, were in the assistant role. And I then got the opportunity to go to Moscow, where we ran covert agents out on the street of Moscow. And that's what I did nights and weekends. And I was a member of the embassy during the day. It was quite a challenge there. This was mid 70s. This was 1975. It was Cold War. It was Brezhnev. It was SALT talks. And it was a real challenge to live there. I had to be very careful, and I had to know what the KGB was up to, and whether they were following me. And it was an amazingly challenging, and I had to think independently, you see, and that's where I drew that experience from my time at Drew University. I had to be able to depend on my logic, my reasoning, and act independently, because I would go out on the street to put down dead drops or packages for an agent, and then I had to pick up packages, and I was all by myself. I didn't have, like most of the guys in our office had wives, so they had a helpmate, they had another set of eyes, but I worked on my own. Like I said, and what I've written about in my book, The Widow's Spy, eventually, after 21 months in Moscow, I was arrested. The agent had been compromised by a spy who had been hired on contract within the CIA. So it was quite a ride, I must say, for your first tour on my own in Moscow in the middle of the Cold War, and it kind of set the stage for the rest of my career. I worked in Soviet operations, and then in counterintelligence, counterespionage, and then in the last 5 years of my career, I worked in the Counterterrorism Center, which I found was as rewarding as my time in Moscow. It was very challenging, and CIA did amazing things during the time before and after the attack in New York. I really had a very satisfying career in CIA. I can look back on it as having accomplished a lot of things, and I'm not sure they were my goals. I'm not sure I really ever had defined goals, but I did retire at the highest rank, and I was very proud of that. But I do realize that a lot of the critical thinking and the independence of being able to act on my own with confidence came from those years at Drew, when we were developing and learning how to live in our society, which was it was becoming less settled during the Vietnam War protests and the drug issues that came about at that time. So I thank you very much for this award. It is very meaningful to think that someone who's, we've lived a full life has been recognized, and I do appreciate your recognition, and I thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marty and Ellie. It's really fantastic. I'm gonna just kind of try to go back to spotlight and then gallery. But thank you so much. I think there's language that resonates here, and that it mirrors the language that we heard the Alumni Achievement Awards. For those of you who were there on Saturday, I drew my ability to function from Drew, right? I learned how to live in an insecure world because I felt secure at Drew. And I think that's just such a powerful message. So thank you very much. I do want to open this up now to everyone else to ask our awardees, who were obviously two trailblazing women, to please go ahead and ask questions. If not, I do have some prepared to keep us chatting, but I hope that their fellow alums will be comfortable asking them a few questions also about their experiences or anything else, or just chat amongst yourselves. I'd be very happy to hear that as well. Feel free to unmute as you want.
Carol, hi, this is Charlie Lechner from class of 1980. Thank you for putting this on. Marty, I was really intrigued to hear your talk, having an interest in just general history and espionage. And I was just curious that, to your point, at the height of the Cold War, Moscow being, to the limited reading I've done, being sort of the showcase or sort of the pinnacle of the CIA, that was your first deployment, it sounds like. And I was just wondering if you had any influence on the selection, or how your selection came for you to be in Moscow.
Oh, thank you for the question. When I finished training, I was offered a couple of positions in the Far East, and I had already served there. And there was, this was just less than a couple of years after my husband died, and I found it hard to even think about going back to that area. So I was very low ranking in CIA in relative terms, and so this man called me and said, "Would you come for an interview? I think we might have a job for you." And so he asked me whether I would be willing to go to Moscow. Well, this was unique because they did not send single women to Moscow. They only sent married couples. Even the secretaries out there had husbands who also worked in our office. So it was kind of risky for the CIA. I guess they figured that we would be taken upon by Yvonne, who would try to recruit us. So I think they thought it was more of a honey trap to send a young woman out. I was 30 years old. But as it turned out, what they were trying to maximize was the diversity of not sending everyone that looked alike. And my being a single woman certainly wasn't the same profile as most of the other people in our CIA office, who were all younger or middle-aged men who were married. So they thought that the KGB would be fooled by this, which they were. The KGB admitted later that they never saw me because I lived a very kind of obvious, normal social life. I worked, I went to parties. They could see me. and it didn't seem that I was doing anything nefarious. So yes, it was my first assignment, and yes, it was very unique.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? If not, I have one for Ellie. Can you please explain what computational musicology is?
Yes, right. Well, yeah, it's a subject that we teach. And I am going to retire pretty soon because I think I've been around long enough. But I do still love teaching. We're trying to figure out, and have been for a few decades now, how to deal with musical material, not your recordings or your streaming service or those sorts of things. Although that's a possibility, it's just not quite as well advanced right now. To take data from musical scores and have a computer digest it, and then be able to do the same things with it as we can do with text when we're word processing, when we're writing letters, when we're looking for all the instances of the word the or the word drew or whatever word you're really interested in, but also to look at patterns and phrases and so forth. So it combines elements of a little bit of artificial intelligence, but mostly pretty straightforward, fairly rugged things. And one of the problems in the field, I don't know whether it's a problem, it's just a state of being, is that there's no single code. You know, we use Roman characters for English, but we don't use Roman characters for music. And I think most people would appreciate that if you want to type a letter in Mandarin or Vietnamese or Arabic, you can't use a Roman alphabet. You have to do things in other ways. So some elements of the field are very technical, but in a lot of the work I've been involved in, the emphasis is actually on processing. It's on after you get to the stage where you have a lot of things in the computer that relate to, let's say, Beethoven or Mozart or Haydn or Berlioz or whomever. How can you actually make use of it besides just listening to it? And of course, listening is the heart of musical experience. So we wouldn't discourage you from performing it or listening to it. But there's a whole lot more you can do with it. I mean, we do things with text all the time now that people 100 years ago wouldn't have thought of doing. So some of it's experimental, a lot of it's experimental actually. And because there isn't any single code, then it becomes important to figure out what's out there, round up all the people, try to get them to talk to each other and see what ideas they can come up with and what opportunities they can find. And there's really a lot going on right now, but it's also a very early time in the in the overall development of the field, and it's a small population. It's something that industry is not interested in because they don't see any big killing to be made from it. And so in a way that's nice because we do this work about 10 miles from Google's headquarters and about 10 miles from Apple's headquarters. And, we'll honor certain values if we do it that won't be honored if it's developed by industry. So we're very aware of this. The other dynamic of my career has been that we came here almost 50 years ago because my husband was a postdoc at the Linear Accelerator at Stanford. And I had this fine training and degrees and connections and all sorts of things, but there was almost no work that I was really interested in that was available to me unless I wanted to retread and change the direction of my career. And so we had a small child, and I didn't think about it too hard for several years. But then I eventually decided to start taking computer classes in the local community college. And I wasn't really awfully keen on the idea of going out to work 40 hours a week in one of the local companies. It wasn't Google or Apple at that time. Apple was just beginning, actually. But it was other companies like Hewlett Packard and Oracle that were both pretty strong, and then all the companies that manufacture chips for computers. And so I wasn't really in a hurry to go anywhere, but I did, once I discovered this intersection and that there were some other people around who were very interested in figuring out ways of using computers to study musical material, I became more and more interested in it. So I've learned a lot on the job because there weren't any courses to take. But we, 25 years ago, we started some courses at Stanford to make that transition easier. And most of our students go out and work for big corporations that you read about on the front page of the newspaper every day. But that doesn't mean that they don't use some of what they learn, because they gravitate in one direction or the other, and they have an extra skill that they might not otherwise find. But there's plenty of room for company, and it's best not to set your goals on a short-term basis, because it takes quite a while to achieve things that a lot of people will be interested in. So we just sort of plod along. But the company's been fascinating. Other people, you know, when I was young, and even when I started out in this field, people believed that you had to be one thing or the other. You know, you could be a computer scientist, you could be a music librarian, you could be a music theorist. You could do X, Y, or Z, but they were all exclusive. You could do this or this or this or this. And over the last maybe 15 years, I've seen this gradual convergence that we get more and more students who are both. It's not or, but it's and. They do this and they do that, and they do something else. And we have had quite a few students, and do at the present time too, whose interests are not in Western music, but they're in music from other places. So that this year, one of our students in our seminar is, he's Korean by birth. He's studying classical Chinese. He has joined a Turkish musical ensemble, so he can learn how to play an instrument called the nez. And he's working on, he's trying to develop his own tools to further some of his own interests, and his interests are practically unique in the world. So it's just an unusual combination, but it's an awful lot of fun to see students going through sort of trying to be their own agents and their own advocates, and figuring out how to do this. And what comes out of it in 50 years, I can't possibly imagine. But I think it's a good thing. We were a little stumped back about 25 or 30 years ago when we started getting these students. First of all, we had a wave of Asian students, South Asian and East Asian, who had no interest in the repertories of the countries they came with, but they were very well schooled in Mozart, or they were very well schooled in a lot of what we value in the West. And then we hit a wave of students who were second generation Indian or second generation Japanese or Chinese, who had some interest in some of the things that from their parents' cultures that they hadn't directly experienced themselves. But now we have all these students who are very interested in preserving the repertories of their own homelands, but in a very 21st century way. So I'm on the edge of my seat all the time, because I'm always looking at what will be the next thing over the horizon. And I'm sad to retire in many ways, because it's so exciting to watch all this, but I tend to feel that I'll keep an eye on it. even after I decide to sit back and read a few books.
Wonderful.